Under the vaulted chambers of the Galactic Council, arrogance had become the very air its members breathed. Civilizations older than Earth's first written word gathered to determine the fate of what they considered a newly discovered primitive. They prided themselves on centuries of domination, on the orderly hierarchy that placed their species as arbiters of the stars, and on the belief that no young world could ever challenge their decrees. It was here that the name of humanity was brought forth, not with respect or admiration, but with ridicule dressed as debate. They spoke of Earth as though it were an inconvenience, a crude backwater that had stumbled too quickly into the domain of the stars. Reports detailed humanity's astonishing pace. Barely a century separated their first powered flight and their leap into interstellar travel. To the Council, this rapid progress was unnatural, undisciplined, and therefore dangerous. They recounted the wars of Earth with contempt, shaking their heads at the sheer frequency of bloodshed across millennia. The Counselor of the Triune World sneered that a race so willing to slaughter its own kind would never learn discipline under the stars. Another scoffed that humans treated adversity not as deterrence but as invitation. Laughter filled the hall when one elder recited the list of Earth's self-inflicted catastrophes, from nuclear detonations to ecological scars. To them, this record was proof of barbarism. Yet beneath their disdain lay an undeniable threat of unease. Humanity had sent envoys to petition for membership, presenting plans for cooperation, trade, and scientific exchange. The emissaries spoke calmly of coexistence, offering technology born of ingenuity rather than centuries of alien tutelage. But the Council saw insolence instead of partnership. In their eyes, Earth's very confidence was offensive. Who were these upstarts to step into the halls of those who had bent countless other worlds into compliance? The idea that humans expected equality was unthinkable. The debate sharpened as factions within the chamber demanded action. Some argued that Earth should be quarantined, stripped of star drives, and reduced to planetary isolation until it learned humility. Others, more hawkish, proposed direct annexation, absorb humanity before it could become a rival. The Counselor of the Vadries clans thundered that hesitation was weakness, and that the galaxy had no room for a predator species with ambition unchecked. The murmurs of agreement were strong, for the chamber was accustomed to stamping out sparks before they could ignite. Humanity's representative, a lone envoy standing before hundreds of alien delegates, delivered a response that froze the air. With steady words, they rejected the notion of subjugation, refused the idea of inferiority, and asserted that humanity would not kneel to decrees forged in arrogance. The envoy did not shout or threaten, they merely stated that Earth would chart its own destiny, in peace if allowed, in defiance if forced. The silence that followed was not one of respect but of outrage. To defy the Council openly was an act rarely seen, and such defiance was never tolerated. Within moments, the chamber erupted. Accusations of insolence, warnings of punishment, declarations of humanity as a threat echoed from every corner. One by one, species raised their voices in condemnation. The Council speaker called for a vote, and the decision was unanimous. Earth was declared an enemy of order, a rogue civilization to be contained by force if necessary. Their emissary was dismissed under heavy guard, not as a diplomat, but as a warning to all who might share humanity's audacity. In their triumph, the Council congratulated themselves on their decisiveness. They believed they had extinguished a danger before it could grow teeth. They thought they had reinforced the hierarchy of the stars with another display of dominance. Yet beneath their pride lay ignorance of the one truth their histories never taught them, that on a world of storms, predators, plagues, and endless war, humanity had been tempered not into subjects, but into survivors. The Council had not silenced an upstart. It had provoked a species that had never once accepted chains. The declaration of war was entered into record as routine, no different from countless sanctions imposed across centuries. But history would remember it differently. For on that day, the galaxy's rulers mistook scars for weakness, resolve for arrogance, and endurance for fragility. What they believed was the containment of savages was in fact the sounding of a bell that would echo across every world they governed. By condemning humanity, the Council had done more than declare war on a single species. They had awakened a force that history had already proven relentless. In their arrogance, they had set into motion the unraveling of their own dominion. From the moment the decree was cast against Earth, the Council believed they understood what kind of foe they faced. Their intelligence briefings painted humans as reckless, their civilizations as unstable, their history as proof of a species destined to implode. What those records failed to convey was the pattern hidden in plain sight: humanity's ability to endure every catastrophe and emerge sharper, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Where other species thrived in gentle climates or steady environments, humans were forged in constant hostility. They did not merely adapt, they flourished because of challenge, not in spite of it. Across the galaxy, many civilizations could trace their evolution to lush worlds where predators were scarce and resources plentiful. Cooperation was the natural path for such species. Their biology discouraged risk, their cultures discouraged confrontation. Humanity came from a crucible entirely different. Their Earth was a battlefield of extremes: freezing ice ages, searing deserts, endless cycles of famine, storms, and shifting landscapes. To survive meant improvising, to prevail meant defying limits. This history birthed instincts no Council scientist fully appreciated. A human's body could run wounded and still fight, endure temperatures that would kill delicate alien forms, and consume a diet so varied it bordered on reckless experimentation. They were omnivores of both food and experience, consuming adversity as fuel. Pain, which crippled so many species into paralysis, was a warning to humans but not a barrier. Accounts of their wars revealed soldiers pressing on with shattered bones, explorers crossing oceans despite storms, mountaineers enduring deathly cold for the sake of reaching summits no one else dared attempt. Even their diseases shaped them differently. Plagues that wiped millions did not end civilizations. Instead, survivors built immunities, communities grew tighter, and knowledge spread to prevent recurrence. Each disaster carved scars, yet those scars became part of collective memory, ensuring the next generation would be stronger. To outsiders, these scars looked like a weakness. To humans, they were the proof of survival. When alien analysts reviewed human history, they saw chaos, empires rising and collapsing, nations clashing in endless cycles. What they failed to recognize was the underlying thread. Each war pushed technology forward, each collapse forced reinvention, each desperate defense created unity against greater odds. From bronze swords to nuclear fire, humanity's weapons evolved faster than any Council archive had recorded from other species. The very trait the Council mocked, restlessness, was the reason humanity outpaced the timeline of civilizations many millennia older. They never stopped striving, because stopping meant extinction. Even their psychology was alien to the Council. Many species viewed war as an aberration, something to be avoided at all costs. To humanity, war was horror, but also a teacher. It was remembered in art, memorialized in stone, analyzed in strategy, and embedded in culture as both warning and preparation. Generations who had never fought still inherited the instinct to resist, the willingness to sacrifice, and the memory of victories wrestled from overwhelming odds. The Council did not understand this. They assumed peace bred weakness and war bred collapse. Humanity's record showed the opposite. Peace was fragile, but war had always been a crucible in which their will was sharpened. Council agents called humans gamblers, willing to risk everything on desperate plays. But the truth was far more troubling. Humans did not gamble blindly, they calculated differently. To them, losing battles did not end wars. They accepted suffering as part of the cost, something to be endured if it meant reaching final victory. Where another species would surrender to preserve survival, humans pressed forward, believing survival meant little without freedom. This mindset baffled alien observers. They could not fathom why humans would fight knowing they would die. They could not comprehend why prisoners resisted instead of submitting, or why civilians armed themselves when professional armies fell. History offered countless examples. When mighty empires once sought to enslave them, resistance movements grew like wildfire. When overwhelming forces invaded, humans fought from forests, mountains, and cities reduced to rubble, never yielding completely. Even when they lost territories, they turned those defeats into staging grounds for eventual triumph. It was not the absence of fear that defined them but the decision to act despite it. Fear drove innovation, desperation drove creativity, and despair transformed into fury that carried them through wars they should never have survived. In dismissing these truths, the Council committed its gravest mistake. They mistook scars for weakness, resilience for recklessness, and survival for coincidence. What they had overlooked was the single defining characteristic that tied all of humanity's history together. Once they were pushed to the edge, they never returned quietly. They came back with fire in their hands, united in purpose, and unwilling to accept chains of any form. To declare them fragile was an error. To provoke them was suicide. The Council believed that overwhelming force would be enough to bring humanity to heel. Fleets far larger than anything Earth had built descended upon human-controlled space, convinced that displays of size and firepower would trigger surrender. Instead, they encountered something wholly unexpected. Humanity did not assemble in neat formations or engage in set-piece battles as the Council's militaries preferred. They scattered, observed, and adapted. The first volleys from Council warships found only empty space, abandoned stations, or decoys designed to confuse sensors. By the time the Council realized these were diversions, human ships were striking their supply convoys, dismantling their logistical backbone piece by piece. What unnerved the alien commanders was not the scale of human retaliation but its precision. Small flotillas appeared where Council forces least expected, striking weak points with uncanny accuracy. They disabled communications relays, hijacked freighters, and seeded misinformation into enemy networks. Council admirals accustomed to straightforward dominance found themselves chasing shadows. Each maneuver exposed vulnerabilities they had never considered exploitable, yet humans found them effortlessly. To the disciplined militaries of the Council, this was dishonor. To humanity, it was survival elevated to an art. On planetary surfaces, the problem grew worse. Council troops, bred for order and expecting swift compliance, faced resistance on every front. Humans refused conventional battle when outmatched. They melted into cities, forests, and mountains, turning environments into weapons. Mines detonated beneath patrols, convoys vanished into ambushes, and fortified bases became prisons as supply lines were cut. Captured weapons were quickly repurposed, often modified into deadlier forms than their designers intended. Alien soldiers wrote fearful reports of opponents who fought even when mortally wounded, who dragged enemies into death with them rather than yield. Commanders dismissed these accounts as exaggeration until casualty numbers forced them to acknowledge the truth. Human ingenuity extended to every corner of the conflict. Mining colonies re-engineered industrial lasers into orbital defense cannons. Civilian freighters became carriers for swarms of drones equipped with crude explosives. Medical ships doubled as electronic warfare centers, scrambling enemy signals. Even when outgunned, humans refused predictability. Council fleets destroyed what they thought were enemy flagships, only to learn they had wasted firepower on hollowed asteroids filled with scrap meant to mimic warships. Every trick bought time, and with each delay, humanity refined its tactics further. Council strategists expected fear to break civilian populations, yet they found the opposite. Where other species crumbled under occupation, human populations turned every citizen into a contributor. Farmers hid supplies for resistance fighters, children acted as couriers, scientists volunteered designs for improvised weapons, and workers sabotaged alien machinery at risk of execution. Entire communities became part of the battlefield, not as conscripts but as willing participants. The invaders could never distinguish combatant from civilian, and the paranoia this bred eroded their cohesion. Every street, every structure, every shadow was suspect, and that constant tension drained morale. Losses began to mount disproportionately. For every human ship destroyed, multiple Council vessels fell to ambushes or sabotage. For every village burned, uprisings ignited in 3 more. Reports circulated of prisoners who resisted interrogation until death, and of units who fought until not a single survivor remained, denying the enemy even the satisfaction of conquest. The Council's image of humanity, as reckless primitives, collapsed under the weight of battlefield evidence. These were not random acts of defiance but a coordinated, relentless strategy of resistance that drew upon instincts older than civilization itself. The message became unavoidable. Humanity would not be cowed by demonstrations of strength, nor broken by attrition. Their tactics revealed a grim truth: they did not fight for territory alone but for existence, and that transformed every skirmish into a battle without limits. Council commanders, once confident of swift victory, began whispering in fear that these creatures from Earth did not simply resist, they hunted. And with each engagement, that haunting realization grew: humanity did not fear death. They turned it into a weapon. The war that began as an act of containment soon evolved into something the Council had never anticipated. Every engagement forced humanity to learn, and every loss transformed into a blueprint for new strategies. Reverse-engineered technology that had once been foreign was dismantled, studied, and remade into weapons no alien doctrine had ever considered. Engines were stripped of limitations, drives pushed beyond safe thresholds, and armaments adapted for versatility rather than ceremony. Council forces, rigid in their traditions, were stunned to see human vessels reappear within months not as copies but as improvements, faster, harder to detect, and carrying innovations their own scientists had not foreseen. Manufacturing hubs across human space became crucibles of relentless output. Civilian factories that once produced mundane goods shifted overnight into war production, churning out fleets of drones, modular weapons, and adaptive armor plating. Human engineers prioritized speed over perfection, flooding battlefields with machines that could be repaired in hours rather than days. Where Council fleets relied on precision and polish, humanity embraced iteration, treating every encounter as an opportunity to refine designs further. The pace was staggering. For every system the Council believed crippled, new human warships emerged stronger, as if setbacks had only fertilized the soil of invention. Even more alarming was the psychological front humanity opened. Propaganda crafted with brutal clarity spread across the stars, not only to their own citizens but to every world under Council surveillance. Footage of burning Council ships, intercepted communications of alien retreats, and testimonies from prisoners circulated until whispers became rebellion. Oppressed species who had endured centuries of quiet submission began to view humans not as reckless primitives but as liberators. Small uprisings flared in distant colonies, straining the Council's ability to maintain control. For the first time in generations, their dominion began to fracture from within, fueled by nothing more than the example of humanity's defiance. Council analysts tried to dismiss these rebellions as coincidental, but the evidence was irrefutable. Wherever humanity clashed with their forces, local populations grew restless. The Council's aura of invincibility eroded with each defeat, and fear, once their greatest tool, shifted against them. The realization was devastating: the harder they struck at humans, the stronger humanity became, and the more the galaxy watched in awe. Battle reports illustrated a terrifying progression. Human fleets that once fought defensively now struck deep into Council territory, bypassing fortified worlds and targeting supply depots, shipyards, and communication hubs. Their understanding of enemy weaknesses was surgical. Ambushes evolved into campaigns of disruption, and campaigns into wars of annihilation. Entire fleets vanished in regions once considered safe, cut apart by human forces operating with ruthless precision. Admirals who once ridiculed humanity now refused assignments against them, citing the unpredictability and sheer ferocity of their methods. Attempts at escalation fared no better. The Council deployed bioweapons and orbital strikes, believing overwhelming brutality would terrify their enemies into submission. Instead, humanity endured, adapted treatments, and retaliated with devastating force. Cities rebuilt faster than they were destroyed, fleets returned from ashes stronger than before, and every atrocity committed only solidified human unity. What the Council perceived as demonstrations of dominance became recruitment posters for vengeance. By this stage, even Council records began to describe humanity in terms reserved for predators. Reports spoke of enemies who fought without pause, who took technologies designed against them and transformed them into tools of conquest. They were no longer considered an inconvenience, or even a rival. They had become something far more dangerous, a force that rewrote the rules of war as it advanced. The shift was undeniable. The hunters of the galaxy found themselves hunted. Every plan built on millennia of predictable warfare failed against an opponent who refused to follow their patterns. The more they resisted, the clearer it became. The Council had not merely declared war on another species. They had awakened an adversary that turned survival into dominance, and fear into a weapon sharper than any blade.